Welcome to Keep Effing Writing. I decided we'd do like a series for this. So, one of the things about making videos is you need ideas, inspirations, if you will, for the videos that you're making. And I don't always have that. So when I don't know what to make a video about, but I have the feel that I want to make a video, I ask my wonderful people on the Facebook machine in Rippers or Regulars, and often I get really awesome questions and ideas from them. As happened today. Today, a wonderful human called Tamsin, I lost my tab. Tamsin says, the writerly thing I'm wrestling with at the moment is how to come up with scenes. I've worked out that I'm a know your characters from the inside out kind of writer, so I get lots of inspiration about who they are and why they feel, but rarely attached to action. I can't even tell you what a good question this is, because it's not something that a lot of people seem to talk about. There's a lot of discussion about what kind of writer you are and different camps and different identities and different labels, but there's less about the nitty-gritty. Blakey, I'm making a video, bro. Not as much discussion about the whole process. So let's talk about action, and let's also talk about character experience. If you know your characters really well from the inside, then there is action associated with that. There are reasons that characters feel things and act the way they do, make the decisions they make, and those reasons are tied to events that happened in the past. They're tied to their experiences. So I don't think that Tamsin doesn't have action beats. I think they're just sort of pre-book action beats, and that is super, super common. The other, of course, the flip side is also very common, where you're reading a book and the way that the character is presented doesn't really jibe with the things that are said about them. And what's often the case in that event is that that author hasn't figured out all of the actions and events and experiences that characters have had to lead up to that moment where they're making this decision or taking this course of action. So super, super common, but a really great question, because I just had to sit here for a while and really think through my process. And I think about this stuff a lot before I could kind of figure out how I approach that. So I will say the book that I remembered when I was thinking about this, it's called Endless Ideas by Sean M. Platt and Nev Silver. So what I loved about this book is that it really addresses idea generation in a way that I feel like a lot of writing advice doesn't. And that's an area where I have tried to really up my game in the last couple of years. Because when I used to write, and this is when I was like a teenager writing books, I was also a character-driven writer, and like nothing would happen. I have, I think, mentioned before that I would write books of all middle, and it would be 120,000 words of all middle. Once it was 400,000 words of all middle. So when you come from that space, figuring out what the events are, what the drivers are, what the external storyline is pretty important if you want to write books for people. You will note that I still write an awful lot of character stuff, because that just interests me. That's just interesting to me. I'm unlikely to write an action adventure novel in which a tortured, straight white American man, goes to some foreign country and does military things. I just don't care. I don't care. Not interested. Lethal Weapon, the first Lethal Weapon, did this very well. You had your tortured straight white man, but you had reasons for it. You had an internal arc that, was it Riggs? It was Riggs, right? Mel Gibson in that movie? Had to go through to get from point A to point B. So there's definitely ways of doing that with action as your genre. but a lot of things don't do it in a way that I find compelling. I'm just, I read a lot of Tom Clancy. I just didn't care. And that's no shade to Tom Clancy. People fucking love his shit. It's just not up my alley. So I do something different. But what I do think is really instructive about books like that, and particularly I think if you don't want to launch into entire novels, you can get this from movies and television shows. Visual mediums have to provide action. They have to provide movement and blocking and all of these things where characters are interacting with their environment. And that's something that novelists can learn a lot from. So, if you're character driven, you're not bad at action. You're just especially good at action that happens before page 1 of the book. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very good skill to have. You just want to pair it with all of the skill building to become better at the action that happens after page 1 of the book. I write dialogue heavy books. I've written books of so much dialogue that nothing happens, and it's really not the best way to write. I mean, actually, I will say, I heard a rumor, I have no idea if this is true, that Quentin Tarantino would write, and this is years ago now, but he would just write pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of dialogue, and that's how he'd find his story. Again, no idea if that's true. It stuck in my head because I'm a dialogue fan. But it'd be like, yeah, he would have 30 pages, and it'd be one scene, and then you'd have to he would take the best bits of all of that writing, and that's what would end up in the final movie. I found this pretty compelling because, for one, I like to hear stories about people who write and struggle and do things in a way that is not super efficient, maybe not even super organized, and just kind of are putting stuff out there and then working through it. Process is super inspiring to me. So I like that in a story about a writer. Or Stephen King in On Writing talks about how character motivation is one of the things he catches in revisions, where he'll be like, so-and-so stole something. And he'd be like, she would have never stolen that. Why'd I write that? That's not even a thing. So that stuff is fascinating to me. And as far as I'm concerned, you can write in any way that makes sense to you. One of the biggest ideas that I got from the book Endless Ideas, which I think is mostly by Nev Silver. I love Sean Platt, but I think it's mostly Nev in this book who's writing. And she talks about brainstorming, making lists, and just being like, what are the things that can happen here? Where are the places that this book can start? Like, I'm going to come up with 10 first scenes. Do any of them matter? Who knows? Are any of them going to end up in the book? Who knows? Doesn't matter. The whole idea is that you're getting your gears turning. You're lubricating the engine in your head that comes up with ideas. So I love that because it's very low stakes. And I think it's important, especially if you're trying to actively improve a thing that you are very critical about in your own work. And that's really across the board, any work. If it's something that you're critical about, you have to lower the stakes. You have to make it okay to write down stupid ideas. In fact, I think that when I was first working through that book, I actually made it a point to write down 5 really stupid ideas first, just to get it out of my system, and then try to come up with 10 more workable ideas. And sometimes it's very hard. There are also people who do it where you do a 10-minute timer and you just write down all the ideas that you can possibly come up with. That feels a lot more overwhelming to me, but I think it works really well for people who get locked into the idea of, I need 10 good ideas. So if you're writing down every idea that you have for 10 minutes, probably within all of those ideas on that list, you're going to have some good ones. The other takeaway that I use to this day, I was revising a book last week and I was still using this, is the idea of heavy lifting. You want to pick the ideas for your character, for your book, for your plot, for whatever, for the scene that you're working on, that do the most heavy lifting. And I really like that phrase because I don't always pick those ideas. Sometimes I pick the idea that seems the most fun, but When I think of it in terms of heavy lifting, maybe it's not doing that much heavy lifting. Maybe there's a slightly more challenging idea that's going to do more for the story, that's going to move the plot further along, that's going to challenge the character in a way that this character needs to be challenged. I have the ring light up in Blake's bed, and she's really confused about how she can like sit in it with the tripod there. Sorry, honey. Yeah, you'll have to get a different bed. Oops. So you're looking for, with your story, with your character, with what you're working on, the events and experiences and ideas that will provide the most growth for your character or the most conflict for your plot. And I say that reservedly. There's such thing as too much conflict or too stupid conflict. But you know what I'm saying. You want to have enough ideas so that you have a few to pick from. So when I was working through the book that I just finished 3 days ago, revising, there were a lot of points where I was like, I know that, the book is done. It's written. There's a beginning and an end. And so I know that this character has to move from the point where they are at this scene to this point where they are 3 scenes from now. What is the way that I get them there? What are the things that are going to logically have to happen in this space? And which one of those things, which 3 of those things, which of those things are going to be the things that provide the most growth and the most interest, the most excitement, the most tension, the most drama. So I think that all of those are good things to think about. And it's not always going to be one idea that hits every mark. What I do think is that the more ideas you generate, the more likely you are to find the ones that have really strong overlap between all the different things you're juggling when you're writing a book, especially, I think, a novel. Though, as I say that, I don't write short stories because I think they're too hard. So maybe it's especially for short stories where you really need the heavy lifting because you don't have the, 80,000 words to like throw in some shit that doesn't matter. So, I'm sure someone's going to, object to the idea of throwing in things that don't matter. But you know what I'm saying? You have leeway to play in a way that you may not have if your deadline is 10,000 words. So I think really the most important thing is to practice all your skills. There are some really good story prompt generators, and that can be a fun way because it's so low stakes. It doesn't matter. You're not going to publish it. You're not going to give it to anyone unless you want to, but it can just help you. You don't even have to write it. Just help you kind of go like, okay, this is a character. This is a situation. What are 5 things that could potentially happen here? What are 10 settings that this scene could take place in? What are 10 antagonists who can show up and ruin this character's day? It's really fun if you can get to the place where it becomes very playful, the place where, you see little kids playing with blocks and they're just building whatever the fuck they want. They don't care. They're going high, they're going wide, they're building a thing, they're building a wall, they're building a whatever. They don't care. They're just having fun. If you can do that, if you can tell your brain that that's what you're doing when you're generating ideas for all of the things that have to happen in stories, it becomes weirdly fun. It becomes weirdly fun to just play in that space. I feel like I've done a lot of sort of philosophical stuff and not a lot of nitty-gritty stuff. So here's what I'll say on the nitty-gritty. Piece of paper, numbers 1 through 10, come up with 10 characters. When you're done with that, 10 settings. When you're done with that, 10 conflicts. I don't even think I had ever thought about conflicts as a thing you could list until I read that book. It's like, what does that even mean? But you really can. 10 crossovers. Oh my God, that's just delicious fun. Come up with fucking 10 crossover ideas. You don't have to write them. You never have to think about them again. You can burn the paper. The whole point is that you're working in your own brain and training your brain how to do things that will really help you in the future when you're writing books or doing anything. I'm learning the guitar. Come up with 10 strumming patterns. You know what I mean? Like all of these things just help your brain learn its job. And if you're going to write stories, one of your brain's job is coming up with all of the events that happen to get from point A to point B. And I think that's really tied into character. Those are not separate things for me. I know it's a bit tempting to see them as separate things, but in reality, come up with 10 backstory events that happen to your character to make them behave the way they are, or to give them the goal that they have at the beginning of the book. All of those things are listable, and I find lists very unintimidating because you can write anything on them, you can get rid of them, you can bury them in a notebook, nobody ever has to see them, and they just let you play through some ideas. So those are my thoughts. Think of it holistically. It's not character-driven versus plot-driven. There's plot that happens before page 1, and there's plot that happens after page 1. And it's all plot, and it's all character. They're both intertwined. So if that works for you, it can be very freeing to think of it as just skills that you're applying in different areas of the story world or of the character's life. So thank you so much to Tamsin for that amazing question. Fantastic. Loved it. I thought about things so much trying to come up with my actual ideas on this topic. So that was amazing. If you also want to play, if you want to throw out ideas, please feel free to join us in Ripper's Regulars on Facebook, chrisripper.com/irregulars. I'm also on Patreon at patreon.com/chrisripper, and on Instagram and YouTube, and now on the podcast areas as well. So for sure, I love this stuff. I could talk about it for hours. So I'll try not to. Thanks so much for watching or listening, and I will see you around. Bye.